Hi everyone, my name is Tajei, and in this video I'm going to be talking about weighing or evaluation for debates. I'm going to be talking about three things. First, what does it mean to weigh or evaluate the arguments you make? Second, why is this important? And finally, how do you do this? So first of all, what does it mean to weigh or evaluate arguments in debates? Essentially what it means is to compare two arguments, perhaps one that you made and one that your opponent made, and show why yours is more important. This means that perhaps it affects more people or the impacts on that group of people are more significant, but the most important thing is that you're actively taking two different arguments or two different sets of arguments, if your and your opponent's arguments can be nicely grouped into different sets, and you're weighing them out and showing why yours are ultimately more significant than your opponent's. Or, if you find that there's one of your opponent's arguments which you don't have a credible response to, another way to weigh is to deprioritize that argument and show the impacts are not very significant at all. Now, why is this important? I think when you've been debriefed by adjudicators after debates, you may have often heard the advice or feedback that while the teams made many good arguments, the judge didn't have a clear way by which they were supposed to weigh those arguments. And that's exactly what we're talking about in this debate. If the judge gives you that kind of feedback, it means that the judge hasn't been told by the teams how the different arguments ought to be prioritized. And therefore, the judge has either had to ignore the arguments which they did not know how to weigh, or the judge has had to weigh the arguments by themselves, which may not necessarily be favorable to your side. And so obviously your interest is ensuring that the way the judge weighs the arguments is a way that is favorable to your side. Now, implicit in the idea of weighing or evaluation is the idea of a metric or yardstick, and this is basically a measurement by which the arguments in the debate can be measured, right? So one such measurement might be the number of people who are impacted, or for example, the degree of impact, or maybe the number of people doesn't really matter. Maybe it's that who is being affected. Are these people, those that we owe special obligations to? All of these are different metrics that you would need to talk about when you do your weighing or evaluation. So back to the second question, why is it important to weigh or evaluate? I mentioned earlier that if you don't do this, the judge is forced to do what is called entering the debate. And that essentially means taking their own preconceived notions or ideas about the topic and using that to weigh the arguments rather than any credible metric which you have provided. And that means that your team may be at a disadvantage if the judge's preconceived notions go against your side. It is obviously strategically valuable if you can also control the way the judge sees the debate alongside what arguments you are making in the debate. And so for that reason, weighing and evaluation are a very crucial part of the debate, especially in later speakers where the arguments have been made and the responses have been made, and to evolve the speech and to add new material to your team's existing case, you must weigh the arguments against each other. This also ensures that there is clash or engagement between the two teams, right? So if the judge complains about a lack of engagement, that often means that the team's speakers have not sufficiently weighed the arguments against each other and prove how the arguments from the two sides interact. If this interaction is not shown, that's why the judge believes that there hasn't been a sufficient degree of engagement between the two sides' arguments, and they are rather independent cases by themselves. So that's why it's important to weigh or evaluate. It is an important part of role fulfillment, especially for second and third speakers, but it also gives significant strategic advantages to your team. So how does one weigh or evaluate in a debate? As I mentioned earlier, weighing or evaluation relies on a metric or yardstick that you would want the judge to use in the debate. So it's important to keep in mind that metric or yardstick and make very clear that metric. And once you realize that that is what you need to do, weighing or evaluation is not actually that complicated, because all you need to do is prove that that metric is correct or that metric is important. And the structure of doing so mirrors the structure of a normal argument, right? There is an outcome you want to prove, which is this metric is important, and there are various steps that you can do to prove that argument. So beginning with the premise that perhaps we ought to prioritize whatever affects most people the most, and then you have to prove why that is a suitable metric to use in the case of this debate. And then obviously the second step is to show how that specifically applies to the arguments being made in the context of this debate. So you would say, for example, the arguments made by our side affect a greater number of people far more significantly, whereas if you look at the arguments on the opposition, they are far less impactful and therefore do not weigh up as well against our side's arguments. And for that reason, on this specific issue, our side has taken the debate far more significantly, right? So that's how you demonstrate the weighing or evaluation you're doing. This is also an important part of adjudicating the debate for the judge, which is another piece of feedback that you might hear often either from judges or from coaches, which is that especially in later speakers, it's important to demonstrate the value of of what you and your team have done, right? So you have to say that these are the arguments we gave you, and these are the ways that they contributed to the debate, right? These are the ways that our speakers have added material that is significant to the debate and not just thrown out arguments. So weighing or evaluation also adds credit to your earlier speakers, where you demonstrate the strategic importance of what has already been said, thereby ensuring that your case is stronger when the judge judges it in hindsight. So I hope that's a useful introduction to weighing or evaluation. We've covered what it is to weigh or evaluate, why it is important to weigh and evaluate, and how to weigh and evaluate. Obviously, if you want to look for specific examples, there are a whole host of videos online that you can look at that deal with this issue. And we also have other videos coming out about related issues that you might find useful as well. Thank you.